You probably think of Victorian London as a place of elegance and high culture, where gentlemen in top hats walked down cobblestone streets. You imagine the heart of the British Empire as a shining beacon of civilization that ruled over a quarter of the globe. But if you were to step out of a time machine in the summer of 1858, you would not be greeted by the majesty of the Queen, but by a wall of stench so solid it would knock you to your knees. Welcome to the Great Stink, which is a period in history that is exactly as disgusting as it sounds. You are standing on the banks of the River Thames, and the temperature is soaring past 30 degrees Celsius in a brutal heat wave that has lasted for weeks. The river is not the blue water you see in paintings, but a thick and black sludge that is slowly oozing towards the sea like a glacier of filth. You try to cover your nose with a handkerchief soaked in perfume or vinegar, but the smell is so overpowering that it tastes like rot on the back of your tongue. You are gagging uncontrollably because every breath you take is filled with the scent of human waste and decaying animal carcasses and industrial chemicals. This is not just a bad smell, but a biological weapon that is attacking the senses of 2.5 million people who are crammed into the city. The problem is that for centuries, London has been dumping absolutely everything into the river because people believed the tide would just wash it away. But in 1858, the volume of sewage is so massive that the tide just pushes it back and forth like a soup in a giant bowl. You look at the water, and you see dead dogs and bloated cats and raw excrement floating on the surface in the blistering sun. But how did the capital of the world let itself drown in its own waste? The irony is that the invention of the flush toilet actually made the problem 1,000 times worse than it was before. Before the toilet, people used cesspits in their basements, which were emptied by the night soil men we talked about earlier. But now thousands of wealthy Londoners are flushing their waste directly into the old drains which were only designed for rainwater. These drains empty straight into the Thames, right in the middle of the city, where people get their drinking water. You are essentially drinking the same water that your neighbor just flushed down his toilet 5 minutes ago. The result is a catastrophe of epic proportions that threatens to destroy the entire city from the inside out. You see people collapsing in the streets from cholera and typhoid because they have no idea that the water is killing them. In the 1850s, people still believed in the Miasma Theory, which stated that bad smells caused disease. So when the Great Stink hits in July of 1858, the population is absolutely terrified because they think the smell itself is a cloud of death. You are walking through a city that is gripped by panic because the air feels poisonous and heavy. The wealthy are fleeing to their country estates and leaving the poor to suffocate in the toxic fumes of the metropolis. The smell is so bad that it disrupts the entire legal system of the British Empire. You walk past the law courts and you see judges running out of the building with handkerchiefs pressed to their faces because they cannot focus on their cases. They try to hang sheets soaked in chloride over the windows, but the stench penetrates everything and makes it impossible to work. The real drama is happening at the Houses of Parliament, which are built right on the edge of the stinking river. You can imagine the most powerful men in the world trying to debate the future of the empire while trying not to vomit on their expensive shoes. The Prime Minister and the Chancellor are gasping for air and proposing that they move the entire government to Oxford just to escape the smell. They appoint a committee to investigate the stench, and they spend thousands of pounds pouring lime into the river to mask the odor. You watch as barges dump tons of white chemical powder into the black sludge, but it does absolutely nothing to stop the fermentation of the waste. The heat of the sun is literally cooking the sewage and releasing methane bubbles that burst on the surface with a sickening sound. It turns out that politicians only care about a problem when it starts to affect their own personal comfort. For years, the scientists and the doctors had been warning Parliament that the sanitation system was collapsing, but they were ignored due to the cost. Now that the smell is seeping into the House of Commons and making the lawmakers sick, they are suddenly very eager to find a solution. Enter the hero of our story, who is a brilliant civil engineer named Joseph Bazalgette. He is a man with a magnificent mustache and a vision that is so ambitious it seems almost impossible to build. He proposes to build a massive network of intercepting sewers that will catch the waste before it hits the river and transport it far away to the east. You are looking at a construction project that involves digging up almost every major street in London. It requires 318 million bricks and enough concrete to build a small city. Bazalgette has to fight against bureaucracy and penny-pinching politicians who do not want to spend the money on underground pipes. The Great Stink gives him the leverage he needs to get the funding approved in record time. You see an army of navvies or laborers descending on the city with pickaxes and shovels to dig the tunnels by hand. They are working in dangerous conditions deep underground, where pockets of gas can explode and walls can collapse at any moment. You have to appreciate the sheer scale of what they are trying to achieve without modern machinery. They are building 82 miles of main sewers and over 1,100 miles of street sewers using nothing but muscle and brick. You watch as they build the Victoria embankment, which narrows the river and speeds up the flow to help wash the filth away. This is not just a plumbing job, but the greatest civil engineering project of the 19th century. You are witnessing the birth of the modern city where sanitation is hidden beneath the ground instead of running through the streets. But while the construction is happening, you still have to live with the smell every single day of the summer. You cannot open your windows because the air outside is worse than the stuffy air inside your house. Your clothes smell like sulfur, and your food tastes like metal, and you are constantly feeling nauseous. The newspapers are full of cartoons mocking Father Thames as a dirty old man bringing death to his children. The fear of cholera is a constant shadow over your life, because nobody knows when the next outbreak will strike. In previous years, cholera had killed tens of thousands of people in a matter of weeks. You see the water pumps in the street and you wonder if the water coming out of them is safe or if it is a death sentence. Dr. John Snow had already proved that cholera was waterborne, but the establishment was too stubborn to listen to him. It took the undeniable horror of the Great Stink to force the government to clean up the water supply. You realize that sometimes it takes a disaster to create the political will for necessary change. As the summer cools down and the rain finally comes to wash away some of the filth, the immediate crisis begins to fade. But the work of Bazalgette continues for another 10 years until the system is finally fully operational. You fast forward to the grand opening where the Prince of Wales turns a valve and the pumps roar to life. These pumps are masterpieces of Victorian engineering that are powerful enough to move millions of gallons of sewage every single day. You stand there and watch as the black water is finally diverted away from the city, and the River Thames begins to clear up for the first time in centuries. The fish eventually return, and the smell disappears, and London becomes a livable city once again. But let us pause and think about what would have happened if the summer of 1858 had been a little bit cooler. If the Great Stink had never happened, Parliament might have delayed the sewer project for another 20 or 30 years. That delay would have cost hundreds of thousands of lives through disease and squalor. So in a weird, twisted way, the disgusting smell was actually the best thing that ever happened to London. It forced the city to grow up and accept responsibility for its own waste. You are alive today and living in a clean city largely because of the lessons learned during that terrible summer. But the system that Bazalgette built is still in use today, which is a testament to its quality. However, the population of London has grown from 2.5 million to almost 9 million people. You can sometimes still smell the faint odor of sewage in London after a heavy storm, because the Victorian system is finally reaching its limit. It reminds you that civilization is a fragile thing that sits on top of a very complex infrastructure. We take flushing the toilet for granted, but it is actually a modern miracle that separates us from the chaos of the past. You press a lever and the waste disappears and you never have to think about it again. For the people of 1858, it was the only thing they could think about. Imagine trying to court a lady or conduct a business meeting while the air smells like a decomposing whale. It strips away all the romance of the era and leaves you with the raw and gritty reality of human existence. You also have to consider the environmental impact of dumping that much waste into a tidal river. The ecosystem of the Thames was completely destroyed, and it was legally declared biologically dead. It has taken 150 years of effort to bring the river back to life, so that seals and dolphins can swim in it again. The Great Stink serves as a warning about what happens when urban growth outpaces infrastructure. You see the same problems happening today in rapidly developing cities around the world, where sewage systems cannot keep up. History is repeating itself, because we often refuse to spend money on things we cannot see until it is too late. So the next time you walk along the Thames or any major river in a big city, take a deep breath. Be thankful that you smell fresh air and exhaust fumes instead of the overwhelming stench of millions of people. Be grateful for the engineers and the workers who spend their lives in the darkness so that you can live in the light. You would not survive 24 hours in the London of 1858 because your modern nose is too sensitive. You would be vomiting in the gutter while the Victorians just held their handkerchiefs and carried on with their day. It shows the incredible adaptability of humans, but also our incredible capacity to ignore problems until they become disasters. The Great Stink was a turning point that proved that public health is a government responsibility. It marked the end of the laissez-faire attitude towards sanitation and the beginning of the modern welfare state. It is a story of poop and politics and the power of engineering to save the world. So remember the summer when the river turned black and the politicians ran away in fear. Remember the smell that changed the course of history and saved more lives than any general or king. And be very glad that you have a working toilet that connects to a sewer pipe that goes far away from your house.